Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at the big story we are tracking for you. Weeks after shelling Ukraine under the tagline of special operations, Russia might soon be changing the branding of its attack to an all-out war. So what is in a name? How will changing the name from special operation to war will change things? Well, British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says that Russia may declare war on its Victory Day on the 9th of May, which is the annual Russian commemoration of the end of World War II. Although it is to be noted that Wallace said he does not have any information about the same. Speaking on Russia's renaming approach, the British Defence Secretary said, and I quote, "It is actually a pathetic attempt to cover for the fact that actually his generals have sent thousands of men to their death because of their incompetence and arrogance and his ego," unquote. The development comes after earlier this month, UK defence officials said that Russia is likely to decide to demonstrate the significance, the military success ahead of the holiday. Over 9 weeks have passed since Russia first launched its attack on Ukraine, and it is yet to make any significant territorial gains. The British reports say that the Russian military officials have been imploring Putin to rename the operation in order to drum up the mass mobilization of its population. Remember that in his televised speech before the Ukrainian invasion, the Russian president said that the aim of the operation is to denazify Ukraine, a claim that they are likely to repeat to gather support of the Russian population who are bearing the economic impact of the conflict. It's also interesting because in the first week of the Russian offensive, there were massive protests in various cities of Russia, and the Kremlin went at length asking media to call it a special military operation and to not call it a war or an invasion. But now that could change. On the other hand, Russia has also been making threatening statements to NATO for the last few weeks. On Wednesday, Putin said that those who intervene in Russia's actions in Ukraine and create unacceptable threats for Moscow that are strategic in nature would be met with a lightning-fast response. However, amid heightened tensions, Russian state media reported that Moscow believes that the risks of nuclear war should be kept to a minimum and that any armed conflict between nuclear powers should be prevented. The comments come after Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned that the West should not underestimate the elevated risks of nuclear conflict over Ukraine. This comes at a time when NATO says the war in Ukraine could continue for years. So what does this mean for the war? The West says it wants to see a weakened Russia. Moscow, on the other hand, has issued a dire warning. Where does it leave Ukraine? Battered and scrambling for peace. Now, for more on this, we're being joined by journalist Alex Ereff from London. Thank you for being with us on this broadcast. Now, how will the changing of the name from special operation to war help Moscow?
Well, I would say, we have to look at the linguistics of this, and as Secretary Ben Wallace suggested, it would enable a larger mobilization of a Russian population, because think about it, special operation, it sounds like the thing that a professional army does, while a war is on a much bigger scale, and everyone's a part of that. And the other thing is, modern Russian identity is very much built on the victory against the Nazis in World War II. And as far as the information that we have right now, it's not being quite as popular among the Russian public as the war in 2014, the previous invasion of the Donbass region. So that might be an attempt for the Kremlin to increase a patriotic feeling and a positivity towards a war that is not going that well.
Mm. Also, in the first week of the war, Moscow warned media against calling its offensive in Ukraine war or an invasion. But now Russia seems to be changing its mind. What is your opinion on that?
Well, as far as we know, Russia expected to achieve quite a quick victory in Ukraine initially when it first invaded. Obviously, that's not happened now. And for that reason, it needs to convince the Russian public why, to justify why this is going on for so long. And I think by changing it from a special operation to a war, people understand that much better, and they can understand why this is being prolonged and why it justifies more force, more men, and so on.
Right. And Alex, NATO says that the war could linger on for a long time to come. On the ground, we've seen Russia change its tactics, moving away from Kiev and focusing instead on the Donbas region. What is your assessment? How long do you think this conflict could last?
Well, previous estimates by people in the State Department have suggested it could last, 10 to 20 years. But that really depends on a lot of factors. First of all, that depends on how fierce of a resistance the Russians face. For as long as the Ukrainian people are willing to fight, the war is going to keep going. But there's also other factors. Foreign statesmen will try to put pressure on the Ukrainian side to make certain concessions in order to bring the war to an end. And I guess much of that depends on how President Zelensky can convince people to accept some level of concession towards Russia.
Right. And Alex, finally, it's the people of Russia who are feeling the economic impacts of this Russian offensive against Ukraine. If Russia now declares war against Ukraine, will anything on the ground change?
I don't think anything will change on the ground, because the situation on the ground is pretty much set. It first attempted a lightning quick strike on Ukraine to take Kiev. That didn't work out. And then Russia started deploying a lot of the tactics that it picked up in Syria, such as, leveling cities to the ground, targeting hospitals, to really demoralize people. And I would say that this change has nothing really to do with war at all. This is part of, what the Russians call information warfare. And it's something that's targeted towards their people to convince them of a certain narrative. I don't think it actually affects what's happening in Ukraine itself at all.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you very much for your valuable insights there on all the latest coming out of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, the Ukrainian
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.